I wanna try and take in all the highs, embrace them for more than a moment's time. I want you, please don't move when I push you away. I know I contradict myself some days, but will you ride the lows with me?
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I am your host, Kristen Sunanta Walker. Our goal is to help discussions about mental health be a regular part of your daily life, no different than discussions about physical health. Mental illness can be a topic of discussion under the umbrella of mental health, along with so many other topics. This show is the original program on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com. Our network of shows are played in over 180 countries and cover more topics under that umbrella than you can possibly imagine. We were talking about mental health long before it became cool and popular to talk about, and thank goodness it has become so popular. We have incredible guests, advocates, patients, experts, people. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy our intro music, a song named Lows, written by Aubrey Toon. You can find her music at www.aubreytoone.com.
That night when I started praying, I cried, will you ride the lows with me? Will you ride the lows with me? When I'm down, my vision gets blurry.
Hi, everyone. Kristen Walker here. We've got a fantastic guest today. We're going to talk about some cool things, his podcast, and also we're going to get into some questions about pets. For whatever reason, we've been getting a lot of emails lately, people wanting to talk about animals and, how animal interaction with those on the spectrum. So, but first, without further ado, Reed Miles, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Not a problem. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell everyone, you've got multiple shows, you've got a lot going on. So tell everyone the name and, what you're doing with your shows.
Well, the main show is called Inside the Asperger Studios or Studio. And I don't know how many people out there are familiar with Inside the Actors Studio. Well, Inside the Actors Studio, he basically takes an actor and you get intimate with them. You ask them questions about their life and their past. Well, with my guests, the main show is primarily about talking with the experts. Anybody that's either worked with somebody on the spectrum or worked with someone who has ADHD or somebody who's like a mother who has children on the spectrum or is on the spectrum with children on the spectrum. And I get to know them, let them tell their story, and it's a casual conversation with people. With the experts, it's more asking the questions that those who were too afraid to ask.
What would a question that people are too afraid to ask? Can you give an example of what one might be?
Well, like I have 3 segments called After Dark, and it's all about sex, intimacy, and relationships. And I know when you're an introvert, you just don't want to ask the question about sex,
right?
About how to approach your partner. How do I know my partner's happy? Stuff like that. In general questions, I mean, like with others, it's like sleep. I talk about sleep because I know sleep is a big thing with ASD, and I have that. I really have a major problem falling asleep.
Is it falling? It's falling asleep, but also what about staying asleep?
Same thing. Well, two different things, but yeah, I have trouble falling asleep and I have trouble staying asleep because I can fall asleep, but it'll take forever, but I'll be waking up very easily. I'm what people would call a light sleeper.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, you're right. No one wants to ask the question, especially about sex, but you're right, though. That would definitely be on the list of possible uncomfortable.
Yeah. My other show is called The Reading Room, which is a play on my own name. And that is where I just talk about topics that I'm very concerned about. Things like I want to help people learn how to talk to your doctors and your insurance agencies about getting on medicine, because it's gotten to the point where the insurance companies don't know what's going on with you, where you don't know the right questions to ask your insurance company. And that's a big thing, especially with ADHD, is the insurance companies have a limit of age. So I'm gonna talk with, actually sometime soon on my other show, an ADHD specialist.
Why and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think it's fantastic. But first of all, what prompted you to even do your own podcast and then turn it into, 3 separate segments?
That's a good question. Well, my my life kind of got turned upside down. Let me go back in time and
Okay.
give you a little bit of background on myself. Growing up, we knew nothing about autism. We knew nothing about ADHD. When I was diagnosed by a therapist, it was learning disabled. They put me on medicine, and it was a stimulant. It was great for a while, until about 18 years old. My doctor said, I want to take him off of it because it had long-lasting effects on the liver. So they took me off of that. They put me on Strattera. Strattera didn't work. It made me feel spaced out. So I took myself off. So now I'm going through life without any kind of medicine, not knowing what was wrong with me, why I act the way I do. My parents didn't know either. And then one day, 2 family members who are both qualified therapists, one for college and one who is an actual therapist or psychologist, told my mom that I think Reed has symptoms of autism, high functioning, and we believe he's got these symptoms. You may want to do something. You may want to look into this. So we did, and it turns out, that some of the things I have are part of the autistic scale. I have problems with filtering, where I don't think before I say. And I have problems with boundaries, spatial, knowing spatial, where to stand, what not to say, what to say, personal space and stuff like that, and it's cost issues.
Right. How old were you? Well, so how old were you when, you started on medication? This is long before you were told about being on the spectrum, but the medication piece, how old were you?
What the original medication, I was young. I was pre-high school. I was probably in grammar school by then.
Okay.
And it was, the drug I was on was Cylert, and it was a great medicine because it stimulated me. I felt awake. My mind was alert. I knew what was going on around me. And then when I got taken off and put on Strattera, it was like a light switch, like someone just flipped a switch, and I didn't feel stimulated. I felt tired the entire day, and all I did was want to sleep.
Right. Do you mind sharing with people about how old you are now?
I am 50.
Okay. Yeah. So you're right. This was, the time that this was going on for you was long before this was a diagnosis that was handed out easily.
Yeah. I mean, to give the listeners a little bit of background on myself, a little bit more, when I was diagnosed, like I said, we knew nothing about autism. And when I went to apply for Social Security, for SSI, they rejected me and said, "Oh, you can do menial work." And we applied twice, and we got shot down. And then the third time, my mom decided to go for a disability law firm, and they told us, "You are going to get shot down the first 2 times. That third time, you're going to ask if you want to appeal. and you want to appeal with a court case. We appealed with the court case. It took several months. We got the case. We met with the lawyer in the federal building here in Chicago, and she went over everything and said, okay, we're going to go into the room. It's going to just be me, you, a judge, and a woman from a vocational center. And he's going to ask you questions about yourself, and you'll answer the best of your ability, and then he'll make a determination. And then the vocational woman will try to prove that there are jobs you can do. Well, she tried to point out every job I could do, and both my mother and the lawyer said, well, he doesn't work well with people. Every job you mentioned, he has to work with somebody.
Mhm.
And she's like, what about a mailroom? And she's like, well, he's worked at a mailroom in the university, at Northeastern Illinois University, and he had problems there. So after that, we left, and the lawyer told us it'll be a couple of months before you get your letter and let your determination. Well, maybe 3-4 months later, I get a letter from them and say, congratulations, you have been awarded full whatever you call it, distribution for your disability. But
Right.
unfortunately, as Social Security, because I had a life insurance policy that was $2,000, said you're not going to get your back pay.
Wow.
And even after I signed it over to my brother, which one of the nice ladies at the Social Security office gave me advice to do, they still said because of that, you lose out on your back pay.
How were you at taking that decision? At sort of,
I was a little upset because I was kind of counting on that money to use to do a trip with my friend, or just use to help pay off some bills in the house. But I was disappointed. But my mom, we had friends in the family who were friends of my brother, she's a very prominent lawyer who my mom talked to, and she says, listen, you don't want to stir it up with them. You don't want to try to open up anything. You don't want to go after the back pay because you could cause more problems than it's worth, because they can literally turn around and reopen that case and examine every little thing, and
right.
they can totally destroy you. So we didn't.
Hmm. How long, well, when did you start podcasting?
Oh God. I started podcasting. It's a funny story. I didn't start podcasting first. In my emails to when I reach out to guests, I always say I am a blogger, podcaster, YouTuber. I had volunteered at a museum here and was let go because of my autism, because volunteers did not like the fact I was standing too close to them. And instead of telling me, they went to my supervisor, and it cost me my volunteership there. I come home and my mother's like, now you should start your blog. So I start blogging, and after a while it starts taking off, and then I figure, you know what? My blog isn't getting as much traction as a podcast would. I need a voice. So
Right.
I just started to I started buying all the equipment I needed, the microphones, the audio interface, the software, and just getting things set up, the hosting companies, and getting the plugins for my blog so I can host it there first.
Right.
So then I needed a name. So I was walking my dog and I thought about it. Inside the Asperger Studio. Because my blog is Asperger Studio.
Right.
They kind of connected to each other. So when I first started blogging, had to be 17, around 2019, 2020,
Okay.
2019. I started blogging, and then maybe a year later I started podcasting. 2020, last year, maybe the beginning of last year, late 2019. And it just started taking off. But my biggest issue was I was going to try to just do what most podcasts were, just me talking about issues.
Right.
And I couldn't do it. I just felt so much anxiety, so much pressure in my chest. I when I listened to it back, it's like you can hear me taking deep breaths in, and it just didn't sound relaxed. I talked to my life coach, and he says maybe you should try the other form, which is guests, getting guests on your show. And it so happens my first guest was a mother who had contacted me on LinkedIn, who had her own blog and had 2 kids and her husband that were on the spectrum. And the first one was not even question and answers, more to say. It was just 2 people talking about everything, life,
Yeah.
about her and her kids, how she deals with her kids, how I deal with my own, and just talking and just enjoying each other's company and figuring things out.
Yeah, I was going to say, for someone that, you've said doesn't work well with others, here's a format where it does. So what do you think the difference is for you between, when you were working, doing a job, and then doing this, where, because there's interaction before the show, they're
Mhm.
getting scheduled, getting headshots and bios and all that. And then there's obviously the show. So what do you think the difference is for you that's made this work?
I guess I think it's more I'm on my own schedule.
Right.
I don't have to report back to anyone. I am in my own environment, I think, and that's the biggest thing.
So
I'm in my
because you're in your own safe environment that you've set up for yourself.
Yes, I'm in my own comfort zone. And
Right.
that's what makes me feel relaxed. I control the show. I mean, yes, I've had shows that run short because the answers and the stories are smaller, but it doesn't bother me because if you look at some of my shows, some run 15, 20 minutes, some run an hour, some run 45 minutes. The way I work it is I'm on their time, they're not on my time. And
Right.
that makes the guests feel more comfortable because they're like, oh, listen, I only have so much time. I'm like, that's fine. I'll work the questions to fit you.
I have a guest that he's a psychiatrist, and I've been doing shows with him for years. And, he's written like 100 books in multiple languages, and several were New York Times bestsellers. And he's got all these mental health clinics around the world. And he's so funny because we never discuss ahead of time what we're going to talk about. And he'll always say, yeah, I think this is really going to be a 10-minute show. I don't see how we can get an hour out of this. And every single time we get an hour.
Well, I mean, it's like my life coach had told me. He's like, you don't even need to have a topic. Let the
Right.
guest dictate the topic for you because they
Yeah.
could bring something up and then that could open up a huge story. And that's why my third show is more not on the informational side. It's more on the entertainment side.
Right.
Because I feel if you look at YouTube and all the YouTubers out there who are doing autism videos, it's more informational. It's more, you have autism, these are your signs, so you know this, and that, but nothing about, hey, let's just like Sam and Gina Mitchell, just talking with people, interviewing them.
Right.
My whole third show, Stories, is not about the person, but it's about their life and their
Right.
story. If you got an interesting story to tell, then I'm going to contact you.
And I think what's people are wanting to hear now, they want to hear a day in the life, because there is so much information out there. I mean, in the beginning, when I first started doing podcasts on the topic of autism, there wasn't that much out there. There wasn't, there really wasn't a lot of information. So we spent a lot of time giving out information. And now really people want to hear, okay, well, look, I want to hear someone else's life experience with this.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I love about my show is it's sort of like question and answers, but the way it is, it lets the person kind of build their story through the
Right.
questions I ask them, and then I kind of relate back to them my own experiences if I do feel it kind of relates. I mean, one of my latest guests was a fluke. I was going after Cody Lee from AGT, and I wound up spelling his name wrong and wound up with Cody Lee, who is a musician here in Chicago who's traveled all over. He's played with some of the biggest historical rock people in this time. He's got his own band, and he's just an interesting guy, and he has a fascinating story.
Yeah, see, you're even doing it. I mean, you do it during your shows, but you're doing it just in how you run your podcast with just sort of seeing where life's going to take you. That's what I love about what you're doing because even sometimes a show is 45 minutes, sometimes it's 15 minutes. I mean, even that audiences really appreciate that because they're not getting the same thing every single time.
No, I mean, my first 4 or 5 shows for my third show were the life coaches from my life coaching organization. They're all the first one was she's the one who started the life coach organization, and it was about her story, and then everyone else was one of her coaches that wanted to be on my show. And then I
Nice.
started reaching out to other people, and the hardest part is just getting a guest.
Yeah, that can be definitely difficult.
I mean,
Uh,
especially like the you're going through the not I've tried going through the booking sites, and that takes a long time before you hear back, and then it's, oh, let me check their schedules and I'll get back to you, and then you wait and wait and wait, and then it's usually, I'm sorry, their schedules are booked up.
You know what's fascinating, and I don't say this as a brag at all. This is just the way it is. I've never had a problem getting guests ever. I've never had to go to a booking site. I th-
How do you
I
reach out to your guests?
We just send them an email and say I'm usually reading something or something runs across my screen and I go, oh, that I'll read an article and then I'll go find out who the reporter was or who the author was, and then I say, okay, I want to interview this person, and that's going on a lot now. That ties into the ADHD piece that I have, where you know what that's like. Your brain's running 100 miles
Yeah.
a minute,
That's why I
and
can't sleep, is because it's constant thoughts going in.
exactly
And it's like,
that make
what thoughts do I keep? What thoughts do I don't keep?
exactly. So getting guests because you're constantly consuming so much information, I think it's just because we put out so many asks, like I would forget that I even asked somebody and we have this long queue of people and now we have this whole network with thousands of people that have come on. But something I wanted to ask you, because anxiety can
Mhm.
be obviously a huge piece. And there are times when you're doing an interview with someone where, like you said, they give you yes and no answers. They don't expand on
Yeah.
anything that
Mhm.
you're as the host, you're like, I got to fill it, like how do you I feel like I'm doing a tap dance sometimes. So how do you, as a person on the spectrum, someone with ADHD, how do you handle those moments when you're on the air?
Well, I mean, like my first guest on my third show, Stories, was the head of my ADHD, my ASD life coach service. And I was hoping she'd tell a long story of her, how she started and everything, but it was short. And usually I try to make my shows run an hour, and I'm thinking and I'm thinking and I'm thinking. And I'm like, you know what? I'll just ask her the questions, because usually I would ask the questions at the end of the show. So I asked the questions, and I'm hoping she kind of would exaggerate, because some of my questions make you think, and they're And usually they can let, sometimes the questions really make you think, and they extend on that, and that will push up time. So that's how I do it. Sometimes I can't control it. I mean, I've had
Right.
guests where my show just, where I'll go through them. I start off with them telling a little bit about themselves, go into my questions, and then I go, now tell us about your story now, where you are in life. And then I go to the last set of questions, which are the more famous questions from inside the actor's studio. And then I end it. And usually what's funny is after I end the show, I wind up talking with the guests like
Yes.
30 minutes more, because
And you're
we
like, why weren't we recording this? Sometimes those are the best parts of the show.
yeah. I mean, I've had, what I don't do a lot of editing with my show, except for maybe cleaning up the audio a little. I don't cut because that's way complicated. Then I got to figure out lining up. I like it to make it sound natural, like just two
Yeah.
people chatting. And I had an instance where I had a show where I was talking with a woman on the spectrum. She's an author. We're talking about females and on the spectrum and how she deals with things and how her two kids are on the spectrum. And somewhere in the middle of that, in the conversation, her Alexa goes off and lets her know that she's got an interview with me. And she goes, joking, she says, "Oh, I know you can edit that out."
Right.
Well, I tried to edit that out and it put things in, things weren't lined up correctly. And I'm
Right.
sitting there watching TV with my mom one day, and some girl messages me on my Facebook page and goes, "Hey Reed, I just want you to know there's a gap here. There's like a 5-minute gap here and a 2-minute gap here near the end of your show. Can you fix this?" So I hop onto my computer and I look at it and I'm like, no, I can't. What I did though is I just threw it up the way it was, all natural, cleaned it up, no editing, because then it just sounds just like two people chatting.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole science behind it. That it's a lot of work to get these done and to, be talking about information that other people might want to hear. And sometimes with a show, people, you're going to lose some audience if that they're not wanting to tune into what you're talking about. But the day in the life stuff, this is how I live every day. This is what I'm dealing with. Those I see, just looking at it from a network perspective and having many podcasts about autism, those I see people really sticking around and listening to the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, the one big thing I do notice is a lot of people don't tend to listen all the way through my podcast and some of my shows. Some people listen maybe 15 minutes, some people listen 30 minutes. No one listens completely all the way through. And that just boggles the mind. Like, why don't you listen to the rest of the show? And somewhere in my mind, it's like, maybe I should do something like where I can say, hey, if you listen to the end of the show, I'll give out something, blah, 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 blah. But I'm like, yeah, but what am I going to give out? How can I give out something? I don't have anything to give out. I don't have a sponsor yet to give something out to.
It's pretty typical. That happens on most podcasts. Talk
I
to
mean,
me about, where did you go to find out? You went as an adult and you found out as an adult that you were on the spectrum. So what was the process like? So people that have kids on the spectrum that have now become, or that were actually, that they don't know yet and they want to get tested as an adult.
I had, I wasn't really tested as an adult.
Mm,
We knew, my doctor, my primary care doctor knew that I was on the
okay.
spectrum. I had the things. When I first started, I was seeing a psychiatrist who specialized in learning disabilities, and he was the one that put me on the medicine. And then after him, as I got older, things just got complicated. My parents didn't know what was going on, why I was still acting the way I did. And then later in life is when things started ringing bells. But for those who have kids on the spectrum and you're not sure, there are signs you can look for. I mean, if your kids are over friendly, if they say things inappropriately and don't know about it. I mean, one of the biggest things of autism is people say we have trouble with empathy. And if you think about it, it's kind of true, because if we say something to somebody with no filter, our minds aren't thinking, are we going to hurt that person's feelings if we say this?
Right.
And we don't know it until they tell us back. And that's happened a lot with me. So be on the lookout for signs that your kid learn little things. Go
Think
on.
of a situation where that happened and someone told you. How did you feel? What was going on with you internally? What your thoughts around it, your feelings around it when someone told you, "Hey, you did this and it made me uncomfortable or it hurt my feelings."
I've had that happen a lot. I've had friends who I've had it happen with friends. I've had it happen with family, and it's caused kind of a rift. I mean, a good example of this is I had said something to somebody in my sister-in-law's family, not thinking it through, and my parents weren't there, and the message got back to them. I come home, and my mother just rips into me about, how could you say this, this, and this? No, we had to backtrack and let them know that you didn't mean it. And it just made me feel low.
Mm,
There is a website out there called Asperger's Experts, and it's one of the things they mention is something called a defense mode, where when people don't know, where when something happens, you just go into your shell and it takes a while for you to come out.
right.
And that's kind of what happens with me, even with people telling me I did something wrong. I feel it when they tell me. I get this feeling in the gut of my stomach, and then I just start feeling like shit.
Right.
And I quiet down and I don't say a word, and I just feel bad the rest of the day and like, why did I do this? But I mean, there are people out there who either consider it a curse or a blessing. I consider it not a curse, but a blessing, because it's brought me to where I am today. It's
Right.
made me unique.
I know there's something, we have all this body positivity movement and, all these things. And I'm thinking, we need to usher in the autism positivity movement. I mean, we've ushered in the awareness piece, and that's
Mhm.
great, but it needs to move now into that next phase, which is, you know, the positives around this,
Yeah,
instead of the language around, oh, disability, disability. And I understand where that comes from, obviously, but we need to have a more positive, viewpoint of this.
trust me, I've been in autism Facebook groups where people are so against the term disability,
Yeah.
where they're like, my son doesn't have a disability. I'm like, I beg your pardon, but your son does. It's a mental developmental disability, but yet it's still a disability. You can call it what it is, but it is a disability, like it or not. It's like a lot of people don't like the term Asperger's, but it is what it is.
Right. Well, the last thing I wanted to ask you about, and I mean, seems like I'm doing a 180 here, but I have to get this in because we just have had so many emails.
All right.
So many people are talking about pets and being on the spectrum. So you have a show that you did about this on your podcast. Can you talk a little bit about that guest and about this topic?
Sure can. The vet's name was, if I remember, Dr. Cliff, and I believe he's in Canada. Yeah, he's a Canadian vet, really nice guy. He kind of reminds me of, I don't know if you ever watched the animal show Dr. Jeff, Rocky Mountain Vet.
Yes.
He reminds me of Dr. Jeff because he goes around and does all these awesome things with animals and helps out all over the place. I wanted to do a show on animals with a vet because animals are so crucial to those on the spectrum because they give us something that we can't get normally from family and friends, and that's that unconditional love and support. And pets seem to know this. I've seen pictures of autistic kids with their curled up with their dog or their cat. And the biggest thing is with a pet, not only does it give support, but it teaches the kid a life lesson and that it teaches the kid responsibility.
Right.
And that's the most important thing. You have a pet, you're going to learn how to take care of it. You're going to learn how to feed it, walk it. You become responsible for it. And that's something you're going to take with you for the rest of your life.
I think that big piece too is even more than the unconditional love. I mean, our parents can unconditionally love us, even though sometimes the way that they show that love isn't very healthy,
Yeah.
but a pet loves you without judgment.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter whether you talk too fast or you don't talk or you say something that might hurt someone's feelings. It's not going to hurt your pet's feelings. You're just you and they just love you. That's the best part about it. There's zero judgment from them.
Yeah. And the other important thing is your pet senses when you're going through something.
Right.
A lot of people don't realize this. You could be sick, you could be feeling down, or any other kind of mood swing. I mean, that's why these dogs are taught to help with like anxiety and depression. And they're taught to like, hey, I'm here for you. You let me go get your medicine if you're feeling this like this. Have you taken it? That's why pets are so important. They have an understanding that not many have.
Absolutely. And there's so many service dogs too that are trained to work with kids and work with, kids and adults that are having a meltdown. And
Oh yeah.
whether you're on the spectrum or not, there are dogs that are trained to, to do this for you, and cats and so on. So yeah. Well, what specifically about this vet? Why was, this vet important, for the
Um,
show?
he was one of the first vets usually when I reach out to somebody, at least in the main show, I want to make sure they have some kind of tie-in to autism or they have a tie-in to the topic I want. He was like one of the first vets I saw, but what made him special was he has family members who are on the spectrum.
So he has that understanding. Yeah.
So he has a deeper understanding of people on the spectrum. So he knows what we're going through and he knows how important pets are to us.
Well, Reed, I'm so excited. Listeners, his show is now on the network, which is fantastic. And tell everyone, again, the name of the show and, how they can find out more about you.
Well, the name of the show is Inside the Asperger Studio with no S. You can find me on the Mental Health Radio Network, or you can find me on my own website on aspergerstudio.com, where you can find out my history, everything about me, my travels, and everything else I've done in my life up to now.
Fantastic. Reed, I'm excited that you're part of this. Thanks for coming on the show.
Not a problem, Kristen.
Listeners, thank you for tuning in, and we will catch you on the next episode.
But will you ride the low, low, lows with me? Will you ride the low, low, lows with me?
One thing you can always count on at Mental Health News Radio Network and my show is that there will always be dogs around. Why? They are natural healers, excellent for your mental health. The original therapy dog Miles has something to say in just a moment. For now, please check out all of our amazing shows at mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com and all your favorite podcast apps. Until next time, I'm Kristen Sananta Walker, and thank you for listening.
Me tonight, and I can ride the low, low, lows with me. I can ride the low, low, lows with me.
boy.